Today's topic will be pond management in a hot environment. Well, today we're going to talk about pond management in a hot environment. I come inside, it is just too dang hot to be outside to talk about it, but I wanted to kind of show you our pond and kind of give you an idea of what a pond can be in a hot environment with the right pond management. There's a lot of reasons that you want to have a pond on a homestead or in general. Fishing, a landscape feature, a place to produce fish so you have fish to eat, and you know, some people want one for a swimming area. We kind of wanted it to be every bit of those topics when we originally started. Since then, we've eliminated the swimming area and have put in a swimming pool. Excuse me. But we wanted to have an environment that we could entertain family, that we could produce fish. And I am a diehard fly fisherman, anybody that follows this knows. So I could have a place where I could go fly fishing and also teach people how to fly fish. Living in Southwest Oklahoma, fly fishing is not a real popular thing. So this gave me the opportunity to take people and show them different techniques on a fly. So with that, we are at day 51 with no rain of any measurable amount, and we are at day 47 of 100-degree plus temperatures. So we've went 50 days basically without any rain and above 100-degree temperatures. We've had 2 days where it got up to 118. As I walked back inside, you can see I'm flushed in the face. I looked at the thermometer on our porch and it's 170 degrees in the shade right now as I'm making this video. So with that said, there's some unique things that take place in a pond that you need to be prepared for if you're going to do this. Now, as anybody who follows along knows, that my pond is probably my most important feature that I have at my house. To the point when we bought this whole house to remodel it, I remodeled the house enough to move into it, but then I started digging my pond and got carried away with air, and I have still yet to finish my house. So this thing is one of the most important things next to my family to me. I absolutely love going out there. Our family loves going out there. Me and my father built it before he passed away from cancer. So there's a very special bond with me and my pond. And managing this thing has been a trial and error experience, and I am an avid reader. I have literally read over 200 books on raising fish, on ponds, on landscaping, all the ideas to build and facilitate this pond that we had. Now, when I dug this pond 3 years ago, it was a wheat field. So there was zero trees, there was nothing out there. I dug it with an excavator. I did not use a bulldozer, so we kind of had to know what kind of soil we had. So the first thing I did is I dug a hole to see what my soil content was. And when I got about 3 foot below ground, we realized we were sitting on red clay. Here we are basically what was known in ancient times as the northern boundary of the Permian Sea, and all the ground around us is what they called the red bed. So it was all the red clay from the ancient Permian Sea area. So 3 foot down we hit clay, which was awesome. So with my pond, the deepest part of my pond, I wanted to make sure that I would be able to keep fish year round no matter what took place. So we dug down 20 foot into that clay. While doing that, we were pretty fortunate. We hit water. So the pond basically filled itself up all but the top 3 feet that wasn't in that clay area. So the next morning after I dug my pond, I walked outside and I was overjoyed because it was completely full. Up to that line, I'm sorry, it was full to the three feet down line. So I had over 17 feet of water in places, and you know, I didn't have to add any water to do that. So I did a little bit of studying and I realized that top 3 feet, it was a little bit more loamy, sandy soil. So I took bentonite. And a lot of people till bentonite in, and you know, there's various methods you can Google to add bentonite to your soil to seal it. But what we did is I took a sandblaster and I filled the sandblaster with bentonite. Now it had to be dry. I tried it on a humid day and it all got clogged up in there and it was a nightmare. But on a dry day, you put it in a barrel sandblaster and you can just blow that bentonite literally into the soil with air pressure, and it just, the second it gets wet, swells up into that dirt and seals it. And it's done a remarkable job. It's not 100% sealed, nor did I want for our situation to have a 100% sealed pond. So it does seep still, but not nowhere near as much as it used to. So with that said, the second thing I did, before I ever dug the pond, this was the first thing I did, but the second thing next to sealing the pond for the use of the pond is I wanted to make sure that I had a good well. And I do. I have a well that runs my pond 24/7. I keep that thing on. That is the reason I like my pond to seep. We sit in a really good aquifer where I'm at, so having that well and the water going back in, I'm basically just recirculating the water through the ground. But with that, I am able to add 64-degree ground temperature water to 110-degree surface water, and I can really keep that water a lot cooler, and I can keep fish way, way, way healthier and not have to worry about near as much evaporation and stuff like that, because I can keep the water temperature cool. To the point that with as deep as my pond is, we hit a plane about 3 foot from the bottom of it that is a different thermal plane. The water is literally cold to touch. So if you jump down in that water and you're standing in that, below your knees is freezing cold, and above is just regular water temperature. So between having that thermal plane and well water going in there, I literally stock trout in my pond in the fall, and I'm able to keep them all the way up through the end of June usually, and then we catch them out to eat them. So it's pretty awesome to have a place in the very southwest corner of Oklahoma that I'm able to have rainbow trout right in my front yard. So with the management ideas that we did, that's something that I was able to do. In designing my pond, a lot of people were like, oh, you need to haul the dirt off and landscape it, make it all pretty and blah, blah, blah. And yeah and no. For a typical environment, that might be okay, but for what I was wanting a secluded private area, and I was wanting to reduce as much wind and evaporation as I could. So I piled my dirt piles literally around my pond as I dug it, and basically made a giant berm that goes around my pond. The shallowest area of my berm is 6 or 8 foot tall, and there's some parts that are over 20 feet tall. So I have built a mass of dirt all the way around the pond except the entry area as well. So with that, we have wind. There's not a tree, there's tree rows that have just been eradicated around here. Basically, if there's trees, the farmers cut them down to plant fields, which really doesn't facilitate what I'm trying to do here. So with that berm, I was able to build some wind blockage. Along with that, I planted a bunch of trees myself, and I planted river cane, because river cane grows way faster than the trees will. And with the river cane, I'm going to be able to block the wind from chemical spray from the farmers. I'm going to be able to reduce sound. We actually live in town, very, very, very small town, and we're literally the last road of town, and then we're a quarter mile from the Red River between Oklahoma and Texas. It's just a giant cotton field. So with the cane, I was able to seclude and build privacy. It hid the berms to where you couldn't see the berms. It dropped the noise from traffic and stuff like that drastically. It gave wildlife and birds habitat to hide. And doing some research, I also learned that river cane is the #1 way to reduce chemicals out of your soil and out of your plants, because it grows so fast that it absorbs all that chemical and disperses it back into the air. Is a safer product than the actual chemicals that were sprayed. So if you have a place that's being ate up with chemicals, or you have bad soil, if you plant that cane, it actually helps clean that. And I've proven that because I did soil samples and had it tested before I did all the cane, and I've had it since, and we have no chemicals in the soil, and we actually had a little bit of residue in the soil before we started. So with the layer of berm, on the inside of the berm, we planted cattails. So I have cattails that grow up into the berm and kind of hide the berm from the inside, and I have river cane and trees that grow up on the outside and hide it, so you can't see the berm. It's built up a huge wall that actually helps catch a little bit of water. It reduces wind, it reduces noise, and it reduces inflow and outflow. There's one way to come into our pond and one way to leave our pond, so we don't have a bunch of things where people are going in and out in different directions. We have an egress and an outgress. It's the same spot, and everything else is kind of secluded and very nature looking in an environment that doesn't look like it belongs in Southwest Oklahoma. When you walk into there, it's a total different environment than just 10 feet away. So adding some foliage was one of the greatest things to do. We have massive windstorms. For the beginning part of spring, we went almost 60 days where the wind never got below 30 miles an hour, and it's nothing to have 70, 80 mile an hour wind gusts around here. So erosion is a really bad thing. Dirt just blows away. Like I say, they cut all the trees down, and everybody's plowing the dirt out of everything, so the erosion is a bad thing. So planting cattails, trees, foliage all the way around the pond has really locked that ground into place. So any runoff water that we get is actually runoff water, and we're not getting a lot of soil going back in and silting the pond out to where we'd have to clean it out later in time. So having them cattails has done a lot of good for that. It also is a great water filter, and we let it grow 6 feet in some areas into the pond, and in some areas it's as thick as 12 feet in the real shallow areas. So in between that, we have minnows and crawdads and everything like that growing around into safe areas where they're not getting ate by the fish. As you can see in my video, I am about 3 weeks late of putting tilapia in my pond, so my pond is really mossed up right now. I allow that to happen. It builds a lot of shade, and it produces quite a bit of oxygen during the day, but at nighttime, when there's no sun, the oxygen can get depleted by the plants having used up what oxygen is there, so the fish aren't having any. So it's a double-edged sword. But what I do is I have so many fish in my pond, and big fish, that I allow my plant matter to grow up drastically. And normally the middle part of June, I put tilapia in my pond. And by putting tilapia in your pond, they eat all that algae up. Now, they won't survive in a cold environment. They won't survive the winters here. So I actually throw traps in there and catch them back out and clean them for my wife for fish to eat. And then I keep some in tanks that I'm able to keep warm. And that gives me fish to eat, but they keep that pond just immaculately clean. Now this year I didn't really care. It has been so hot that I'm not sitting out by my pond very often. It is miserable out there. So what I've done is I've allowed it to grow to the point that I thought I would be safe with the oxygen content. And then at the very last minute, I put tilapia in there at the beginning of the week. And here in 2 or 3 weeks, there will be no more algae. They'll have it all ate down, and they'll have the weeds pretty well controlled. Well, during this time of the year, the fish have really quit reproducing. So I don't need as much cover for the fish because they're not having babies all over the place. So most of the fish have grown up big enough that they're not getting ate other than the minnows and stuff. And they are hanging around in the cattails anyhow. So allowing the vegetation to get ate down and the algae to get ate down at this time of the year, it works out really well. And leaving it during the beginning part of the year works really well because it's making massive habitat and food for plankton, minnows, and stuff like that. Now, by adding tilapia, I can put tilapia in once that water temperature is going to be 65 degrees or better. And if I can get that water 65 degrees or better, then tilapia will be fine. And once that water temperature gets to 80, they'll start reproducing. Every 28 days, they're going to start spitting out babies. Literally, tilapia are mouth breeders. So they actually keep their babies in their mouth, and as they're in the pond, they'll spit them out and go eat, and then they'll go suck them back in. It's pretty neat to watch. But while they're doing that, I am feeding them tilapia 100% for free with all the algae, the moss, and the vegetation in the pond. They're having babies faster than any other thing that you could ever imagine in the pond. So now my bass, my perch, my catfish, they're having literally tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of forage fish to feed off of. So now I no longer have to feed pellets to my fish. So during the hot parts of the year, the times that you would be feeding fish, I don't have to do that anymore. My tilapia are keeping my fish fed. Now that pond at 3 years old with stalker fingerling 3-inch bass, I have a guy who came over here the other day and caught an 8-pound bass out of my pond. So it's working. It's unbelievable. I don't have any skinny fish. They're super fat. Now with that said, I'm about a ½ acre surface area of water, and it's pretty deep in spots, but I have to thin my fish down. So every fall, before the winter time comes, we go out there in the fall. We spend almost every evening out there. We have an outdoor kitchen that we cook out there, and we spend almost every evening in the fall at our pond. So in the fall, when we're out there enjoying the pond, we'll start catching all them fish out that we want to, and we'll clean it to the point where we reduce the amount of fish to overwinter. And last year we went out there in an evening and caught over 120 perch, several bass, as many of the tilapia as we could, and you couldn't tell we had caught any. I mean, there's still just massive amounts of fish. This spring, it looks just like it did last fall. When you go out there and throw pellets in the water now, the fish are so thick and healthy and fat that we could harvest like that all the time. So that little pond supplies a massive amount of fish, enough that if a family ate a lot of fish, you could feed a fish dinner to a family pretty well year-round off of a pond that size, doing what we've done. Now, you heard me talk about putting tilapia in the pond. I do put tilapia in the pond as a feed for the fish and to control algae, but I still also pellet feed, and I would encourage people to pellet feed during the hotter parts of the year. In the winter, we don't feed at all. But I feed my fish at least once a week, but I try to go out there every other day and throw a little bit, and not necessarily for just pond management, but I enjoy seeing my fish feed. So I throw it out there to where they'll at least come to the pellet, so that if I have company, I can go out there and I can throw some in the water and all the fish swim up to it, and everybody can see the 4-foot catfish, the great big fish that we have out there. And it's just neat. It's enjoyable when we go out there in the evening to go feed our fish and they see us and they'll come swim up to the shore, and it's just enjoyable. But I don't just feed pellet. I don't want my fish to where that's all they want and they won't eat natural bait, because if the point comes to where I can't get pellet food, or something in the world goes bad and there's not access to it, or whatever that situation is, I want them to be able to know to forage on their own. But I also want them to be aggressive fish, to where if I throw a fly out there or a lure out there, that they're going to attack it, knowing that it's edible, and that they don't just eat off of pellet. So I supplement with forage fish in pellets. I don't just depend on one or the other. And I would encourage anybody who has a pond to do that same thing. You don't want your fish to be just pellet raised, because then they're going to become scared when things come up to the shore and come after them. They're not going to have enough sense to get away from that. They're going to just, every time they see somebody walk up to the shore, they're going to come thinking it's food. They're not going to have any of that natural instinct that's there for them. Something else that you need to really consider, especially the way I manage my pond with tilapia, is you want to have a bunch of places where the forage fish have a place to hide. And what we did is we went to the dump yard in the town next to us at Christmas time and picked up 20-something Christmas trees, and I chained cinder blocks to the bottom of them and threw them in the bottom of the pond. So there's Christmas trees strategically placed all around inside our pond. And what that did is that gave year-round areas for the fish to hide. And they do. Like, you can go above where the trees are at, and they're just surrounded with fish. And the big fish will swim around there trying to scoop some up every time. But it builds a pretty good balance to where there's enough hiding spots in enough places for the smaller fish to have a safe area to go. And it works with the tilapia in the pond as well. So even after the tilapia really cleared out the vegetation, we still have a lot of structure matter where the fish can go under. Not only the protection from fish, but we have ducks and herring and all kinds of seabirds that fly into our pond, and it gives them protection away from predator birds as well. So you want to make sure that your fish have hiding spots and that they're able to go through there. The cattails, the Christmas trees, and the natural vegetation has done an unbelievable job of that for us, and it works very, very well for us. On the tilapia, I pull my tilapia out every fall, and I have some great big tanks that I raise them in that I keep heated, and I can reproduce them over the year. And then when it warms back up enough to where I can put them in the pond, we just grab some, throw them in the pond, and it's just an ever recurring cycle. So technically, I could get away without feeding pellets and not ever have a feed bill or anything, and have fat fish. I mean, I don't have skinny fish. My fish are, if anything, overweight in this pond. And you want to make sure of that. You want to go out there randomly and catch your fish and make sure that they have girth, that they're not too skinny, and that there's enough food out there for them. And I would encourage you to do that pretty often. If you just throw a bunch of big bass out there and you don't have forage fish, the big bass are going to turn into skinny anorexic looking bass, and they're going to be sick, they're going to be unhealthy. You're not going to have a good environment because they don't have anything to eat. So you want to start your pond out with a lot of forage fish, and that's what we did. Is we had the minnow delivery guy come out and throw a bunch of minnows in. We put shad in, we put a bunch of little perch in, and then I go to the creek all the time with my daughter, and we throw traps or seine, and all those minnows we'd come in and we threw in, and we let them really establish a lot. And then we put the other fish in, and the other fish, like I said, were fingerlings. So as they grew, they started to eat a few, but the other ones had become dominant around the area. And to this day, you can walk around any part of the cattails and there's hundreds of minnows anywhere you go swimming around. So we don't have to stock anymore. I still go to the creek and play around like that, but we don't have to. Our pond has built up its basically own ecosystem. With that said, I do have a lot of cattails. We live in an environment that gets really hot, but also gets really cold. It got down to negative 18 degrees this last year. So with that, all the cattails are going to die everywhere. So you're going to have a lot of mess and a lot of waste that dies and goes down and decomposes in the bottom of your pond. And that's a really good thing and a really bad thing. So you need to be able to make sure and control that as well. And what we did is we added about 15,000 crawdads to our pond. And the crawdads, what they basically do is they live up in them cattails, and they just basically eat all the decomposing stuff that comes into the pond. So in the wintertime, in the fall, when it starts to, all that cattails and the vegetation and weeds or whatever starts to decompose down in the pond, then crawdads are in there eating it all up. And you wouldn't think that they would make that big of a difference, but they have. Before we had crawdads, I'd go out there and literally I made a rake on a chain that I could throw out there and drag all the weeds back so I could get them out of the pond and it wasn't so bad. I don't have to do that anymore. The crawdads have pretty well maintained it. That many have really maintained, and not only that, they reproduce a lot, and they have really helped on a forage for fish to eat off of as well. And I've heard mixed results about people saying how crawdads will make your pond leak, and then I've heard people say crawdads will make a pond seal up. And I actually think the crawdads have helped seal our pond up. It being 110 degrees, pretty well for the average for a month with no rain, drastic winds, and cattails sucking moisture out of the pond, we don't lose near the amount of water that you would think a pond would lose. We actually keep a pretty maintained balance of water. Now I leave my pond to seep a little bit on its own so that I can keep fresh water coming in, but the amount of fresh water I've had to basically reduce because the pond has started to seal up since we put cattails in. So I would say in our situation that they've helped seal it up. Well water. I wouldn't have a pond in a hot environment if I didn't have a well. And I am an avid outdoorsman. I live on a homestead. I raise almost all of our own food, both meat and vegetables. And I don't necessarily like the taste of fish, so I don't eat fish, but my wife does, and I'm trying to learn, but you gotta lick your butt to get the flavor of fish out of your mouth. So I haven't got there yet. So anyhow, I still love animals and think that if you raise animals, you need to take care of them. So I try my hardest to, if I'm going to have an animal, that I'm going to take good care of it, give it the best possible life it can have until we have either butcher it, release it, whatever you're going to do with it. So even with my fish, I don't want to just raise a bunch of fish to die. And around where we're at, pretty much everybody that has a farm pond on their farm has dried out. And they call the truck to deliver fish in it about every 4 years, and that's just the cycle that they do. And they never have any great fish unless they go catch great big fish and put them in there. I have not put any great big fish in my pond. Every fish that's in my pond started out is a 2-inch fish. And most of the fish that are in my pond now are babies to the fish I originally stocked, because we've caught a bunch of the other ones out. So our pond is thriving. It's producing fish. We're not having to stock fish. We're not having to go and do all that. Now, we do have a little bit of an expense for keeping a well running, but that expense is pretty minimal for the amount of enjoyment we get, the amount of fish that we get. And to have this oasis in your front yard when it's 120 degrees outside and you go sit under your pavilion and there's fresh water all the way around you, it gives a nice relaxing area to cool down if you're working outside. You can't be out here and work in the yard or work in the garden or be out working with animals or whatever I'm doing and then go inside to cool off and go back outside. You're done. Once you hit that air conditioner, you're done. You can't go back out. So to have this setup like we have, I can go sit out there and cool off 20, 30 degrees pretty comfortable, and I can go back to work and not have completely come in and air conditioned down. So having that oasis out there, it's done a major amount of good for us. Another topic that I would think is important that a lot of people talk about is aeration. And ponds should have aeration. I do not keep an aerator in my pond all the time. If it gets really hot and dry, I've turned one on a little bit here and there. But what I've done is I got a big sprinkler, and I hook a garden hose onto a sprinkler that shoots way up in the air and drops way down. And that ripple effect adds a bunch of oxygen plus cool water to the pond, and I have had better luck doing that. Now, I do have an aeration system that I keep as a backup for an emergency, but I don't run it all the time. I like a little bit of moss in my pond for habitat, so I deal with that part, and I let the moss build up where the aerators, a lot of people get them to get rid of the moss, where I try to produce enough moss that it feeds my tilapia. And then in the fall, when the temperatures are cool and we can sit out and enjoy it, we have a clean pond. So aeration is something to look into, but I don't do a lot of aeration. Like the amount of fresh water that I add, as big as it is with the wind that we have, the ripples that we have, I have been very successful with having a sprinkler that shoots the water up in the air and back down. And I'm adding fresh water, cool water, and it keeps the pond going. So as far as aeration, that's all I do. The most important thing I think that you can do with a pond is having a good inlet and outlet of fish management. You need to throw a bunch of baby fish in and get it to the point where they're able to reproduce and have a bunch of forage, and then you need to make sure that you're pulling a bunch of fish out every year. You don't want to have 10 million fish in a hole. You can only put so much, sand in a jar, and that's the same with a pond. If your pond is completely overpopulated, you're not going to be able to keep healthy fish in there. So you want to keep a healthy level of fish in there, and there's really no way to check that other than fish your pond. And if you're fishing your pond and your fish are still fat, you're okay. But if you're fishing your pond and the fish are all skinny and really struggling, you need to really reduce the amount of fish that you have in that pond. We have been fortunate. Like I say, pellet feeding helps subsidize that a lot, but the tilapia is the greatest thing we've ever done. You want to get giant fat fish in your pond, put tilapia in there. They throw so many babies out there that them fish go nuts, and I have never seen anything like it. And the year that we added tilapia to the years prior to adding tilapia, our fish literally doubled in weight, and probably 30 to 40% more fish as well. They're eating more, so they're reproducing more. They're just a healthier situation, and we're getting hundreds of pounds of tilapia to eat every year, and I don't have to rake the dang moss out. So if you live in an environment where you can do that, that is absolutely the greatest thing to do. I also am kind of a nature nerd, basically, so I have allowed a lot of the weeds behind our cattails up on the berms to grow up. You can't see them. The cattails block them on one side, and the cane blocks them on the other. So if you drive by our house, you can't see in there whatsoever. It's completely secluded and private. All you can see is cane. If you didn't know there was a pond back there, you would think it was just a big area of cane. You can't even see the hills anymore. The cane has really blocked it out. And then on the inside, the cattails block everything. Well, then berms are between 15 and 30 feet wide, and 6 to 30 feet tall in areas. So I've let that grow up, and we've planted over 100 trees around that area to help build shade. So in time, we'll really have a pretty canopied in area that'll really reduce a lot of the heat, a lot of the evaporation, and just make it way more enjoyable to be out there. So I have allowed the weeds to grow up in that area as well for other things. We have raccoons. I've seen some bobcats come through there. I have a deer that is a 10-point big old buck that comes out there, and he's gotten so tame. I throw a bucket of feed out there for him, and he'll come eat out of the bucket while I'm sitting out there making videos. He's just calm as can be, and that's neat to me. So I've built more than a fishing hole. I've built a little wildlife oasis, and living in an area like we do, where it's, like I say, I've lived literally a quarter mile from the Red River. Well, the Red River is basically a sand dune right now. There may be a trickle of water in it, but it's stagnant and just disgusting because there's no flow. We've had no rain. So we're probably the place where the deer come to water, and that's neat. And they don't come bother any of our orchard. They don't come bother our garden. They come to the water hole and they leave it alone. And I give them an area to hide. I've raised a lot of quail and let quail loose out here to where there's quail and there's songbirds and all over the place. There's all kinds of shorebirds. In the fall, we have ducks come in. And there's a blue herring that lives around all the time. And that's neat to me. So I've tried to allow an area for them as well. And with that habitat, it has also built a lot of water filtration. So if we have a massive rain come in, we don't have erosion. That grass is catching all the water, and we've allowed it. It's a lot of native grasses that have great root structure. So if we do get a massive amount of rain, they sponge it up and help hold it into that ground, and it helps with the trees as well. And we have trees that have come up on their own by allowing this. Some of them are trash trees, but I'll take whatever I can get right now. I'll cut them down later when my other trees grow. But we've had a bunch of cottonwoods come, and I've got a couple cottonwoods that are 2.5 years old that are already 40 foot tall. And now I irrigate them. I have an irrigation system around my pond, but that's shade, and I'll take whatever shade I can get until the shade I've planted comes up there. So allowing that natural habitat has really helped us a lot. I really wanted a place where we could enjoy family time, where we could fish, where we could raise fish, and where we could be left alone. And we've done that. In a 3-year period of time, I can walk out to my pond, and you cannot tell I'm out there unless you see smoke coming from the grill. If we're cooking on the propane grill, you can't tell we're out there. There is absolutely zero places that you can see through. The only place that you can see is the walk-in area, and we have blackberries planted back away from that block that. So if we're sitting out by the pond, it's 100% secluded and private. If a car drives by down the road, you can barely hear it. If the wind's blowing and it's completely miserable outside, even the wind reduction is down. If there's an accidental spray that takes place from a crop duster or from the farmer, we have enough foliage that will catch that is that cane that's pretty durable to that stuff, so it's not affecting our other trees. And it's also blocking our garden area to where none of that stuff is hitting our garden area. We have a backup water source if ever should something happen that we needed to get water. We have a massive amount of water. And if a guy was willing to eat vegetables and fish, we would never, ever, ever have to buy any kind of groceries. I can raise enough fish to feed 10 families off this pond. It is pound for pound, I think fish are way more lucrative to raise than any other kind of livestock. And there is a little bit of expense in building a pond, but I rented the equipment and I dug the pond myself. I didn't hire anybody to do anything at my place. Anything you've ever seen done at my place, no matter how screwed up it is, I'm gonna have to be the one to take credit for it because I've done it all. We don't hire people to do anything. So you can do it yourself and you can make it successful in a very short period of time. In 3 years' time, I have trophy bass, trophy-sized catfish, and abundance of crawdads, all the tilapia you can eat, and it's 100% reoccurring. I don't have to stock it. I don't have to redo it every year. I don't have to do anything but go out there and enjoy it and manage different cycles. I need to make sure that I can keep the moss at check with tilapia. I need to make sure my water level is okay. I randomly check for chemicals, but I've never done anything for them. I just curious to see if I have, and the cane has eliminated any chemical problems that we had. So pretty much the only maintenance that is involved with what I do is mowing the grass areas where we're at and making sure the well works. And that's about it. I could get away without feeding pellets if I chose to, but again, I choose to because it's enjoyable for me to be able to go out there and watch them. So taking some of these steps and doing some of the things that I've done, I think is pretty awesome. I have the only pond within probably 30 miles around here, this small of a pond that has fish as big as it does, that's full of water year round. I don't have to worry about redoing and starting over every year, because how do you buy trophy bass unless you're out there catching them? I don't have to worry about that. You can come to my pond any day of the year and you're going to have the opportunity to catch. I think we have 11 different species of fish out there. In 9 months of the year, there's rainbow trout out here with the way we've done it. So it's been phenomenal. We enjoy it. It's been one of the best investments we've ever had as a family, especially during the lockdowns when everybody was not able to go anywhere. Our family was able to come here. We had a family reunion at our place where all our family came and had a place to hang out. We put RV hookups out here and everybody came, and we had over 55 people at our pond one day last 4th of July, and we had an unbelievable year. It was just awesome. And to have that ability right in your front yard, it's worth every penny that we put. So I'd encourage anybody that wants a pond to do a little bit of research, make sure your soil can handle it, and if it can, get after there and do it. There's a million ways that you can do and treat, and very, very, very little money. We have a couple $1,000s in rental of the equipment. We were fortunate enough to have a well, so while I had the equipment, I trenched a line and buried some plumbing under there to get to it. But the plumbing, I got a good deal on it. It was some used well casing, and I got it super, super cheap. And total everything that we have out there, I bet I don't have $3,500, $4,000 in just a lot of time. And then the trees and stuff like that. But as far as getting the pond going up, you know, that sounds like a substantial amount of money, which it is, and it is. But it didn't have to all be done at once. I did it in multiple layers. It was basically 2 ponds that I connected together, and I was able to do it piece by piece. And other than the equipment rental, everything else was very, very minimal expense. And with what we've done, if I went to the grocery store and spent that much money on meat, I can promise you I've produced more than that meat already. So if you're doing it as a homestead type deal, or if you're doing it for a fishing type deal, that's a total different expense. Hobby expense is never going to be profitable. But as a homesteading expense, we've already made more meat than we could have bought for that amount of money off the pond. And that pond is still completely full of meat, and it's always going to be full of meat. We're always going to have a replenishing supply of meat. And that self-sufficient life that we're going after, it works out really well. So I would encourage anybody to take the steps that we have and do that. If anybody has any questions, you can comment me, and I will do anything I can to walk you through the processes of some of the stuff that I've done. So I hope this helps. I hope this encourages people to know that it's not out of the realm of possibility to be able to do it, and that it's not as hard work as you think. That if you manage your fishery right, the fish take care of everything for you. So anyhow, I appreciate you guys. I enjoy making these videos, and I hope you enjoy watching them. Have any comments or suggestions, just comment them to me, and I'll answer up. Thank you.